Page 197 of The Unfolding is Stories of Motherhood.
She was the first face I saw, and she came up to me and she said, I don't have a mom and you don't have a daughter. From this day forth, you're my mom and I'm your daughter. And she's been my daughter ever since. I just knew I couldn't leave these kids.
God's story has been unfolding.
Since the beginning of time.
He invites you to be a part of it.
Wow. Another page in The Unfolding.
Hey, this is Meredith Foster. Motherhood is a journey of faith that requires trusting God and many times fighting battles on behalf of children. Motherhood comes in all forms: biological, adoptive, foster children. And then there are those who step into a mothering role that's never formally recognized, but it makes a world of difference to that child. Today, we're sharing the stories of three brave women: Courtney Smallbone, Lana Vasquez, and Kathey Garrison. Women who have been willing to step out in faith to trust God as they care for, advocate for, and fiercely love children.
That day, I had put the boys down for a nap and grabbed my cup of coffee. I was going to read a bit outside, had my monitors with me. I tried to read, but my eyes kept blurring, like I couldn't focus. And I felt impressed to go check on Leo, like the Lord said, go check on him.
How old was Leo?
He was 8 weeks old. I felt prompted by the Holy Spirit, go check on Leo and don't believe what you're about to see. Like, don't be afraid. So I ran. Hearing that, I ran where he was napping, and I found him face down and bloody and cold, blurry-eyed and pale, like he was gone, like limp. And so I grabbed him and I started screaming noises I can't, guttural noises, and just ran outside where Luke was mowing, and he saw me and he quickly realized something was wrong. And I put him on the ground. Luke calls 911. I just start praying. Like, at that time I had been reading through the Gospels of just who is Jesus. Let's cut the noise of this TED Talk Jesus, all these things. Like, I want to know who's Jesus. And if I'm a Christian, if I'm a disciple, then my life should look like his. So how can I line up my life to his? How can I look more like him and be a disciple? Like, do what he says to do. And it's the 10-year anniversary of being healed from this disease and knowing these things about God. God is the resurrection life. So I thought to ask, God, bring back my child in the name of Jesus. And there was nothing, no response. He's just on the ground, and Luke's still on the phone. And I say, in the name of Jesus, bring back my child. You said you can do this. I remember saying that very clearly. You said you can do this, and no response. Desperation, but still hope. Determination, I don't know, just I wasn't going to let go. And I think we do let go too quickly. In prayer, I don't think we know what it is the old word is to tarry, is to linger with God, is to cry out to God. We live in a society that doesn't want to be desperate, but we live in a society that wants miracles, and you have to be desperate to have a miracle. And so in that moment, Luke looked at me, and Courtney, they say they're 2 minutes away. And I said, that's too long. It's too late. He's still on the ground, and I get on the ground with him, and I look at him, and I'm just the most surrendered moment of my life. And I just whisper, Jesus, only you can do this, just quietly. And I'm just looking at him, his chest is sunken in, his eyes are blurred back. There's nothing there. And in that moment, I saw his chest expand. My hands were off. Chest expand, color return to his body. He starts crying. I was freaking, we were screaming. I said, he's alive. Luke's still on the phone. They're like, he's alive, he's alive, he's alive. And he fills his diaper as if he woke up from a nap. I'm sorry, that's a detail, but it's true. It's like his eyes were sparkling, and I pick him up, and we're just beholding this miracle, this glory of God that just came down. And the ambulance is pulling in as he has come back to life. So they were shocked. They were just overjoyed. And so, but they're still pretty serious. They're like, you need to get in the ambulance. We need to go. And they told me, they're like, with babies this young, it could happen again, all this stuff. And I just couldn't hear it. I'm sorry. God just touched my child. It was more of a confidence of God is the giver and the sustainer of life. And I don't need to be afraid. Like, that's every person's worst fear. That was my worst fear in my face. And, so we're rushing to the hospital and they're trying to figure out what's wrong. And I'm just praising God. So I'm just in the ambulance kind of processing just what happened. It wrecked my whole life. They do all these, studies on him on like, what was it? And they found that he had a misshapen skull. His skull had fused together. It's called craniosynostosis. And, babies need a soft spot for that. And his was closed. And they're like, well, we think he rolled and he got stuck and he suffocated. And so to this day, his medical charts say near SIDS. And I'm like, well, that's the best the medical, community can do when your brain is your God. And I'm like, well, it's a miracle. He was lifeless and then he was alive, and all glory goes to God. All glory goes to God. So, and even at that point, they're like, hey, he's going to need skull reconstructive surgery, all this stuff. It just didn't bother me because I'm like, God is, covering him. Like, God, I'm not afraid. Like, I'm not afraid.
I only committed 2 months to Thailand. Actually, there was a series of events of confirmation. I didn't know I was called to ministry. I didn't know I was called to missions. I didn't know any of this. I just knew I wanted to rescue children and people the same way that God rescued me. I knew I wanted to do that, but I didn't know the details of that. I didn't know what that looked like. So one major thing is I knew I was rescued to rescue, and different confirmations and different things when I was praying, because I didn't know I was called to ministry. I didn't know I was called to missions. I didn't know what that was. Coming into the church as a 19-year-old unchurched girl, I didn't know what those talks were. I didn't know what those words meant. Like, little by little, God started revealing to me more and more, piece by piece. So I finally, through a series of events, knew I narrowed it down to, I wanted to work with exploited children. Landed here, I was 24 when I landed. I landed April 24th, exactly 20 years ago. And I knew nothing, right? Still know very little, and we had 52 kids, 1 cook, 1 house mother, and 1 interpreter that spoke like 20% English. My first week, I got deathly ill, lost 10 pounds in 1 month, found myself laying on a hospital bed with a dirt floor with a mangy dog coming in while they're giving me a shot of I don't know what, I don't know where. And I was just like, I hate this, and 24 years old in the middle of a rice paddy village where we only had 7-Eleven, and all that I could eat that I knew that was edible was banana bread and orange juice. So lived off banana bread and orange juice my first year.
Wow.
Had we call it a miracle moped for 52 kids. You could run faster than it. We would stop at stoplights for crocodile crossing, big snake python on this little moped, right? It was so funny. And then we would have to get groceries. It was technically an hour away where they had a big grocery store with a KFC. So, but on our Miracle Moped, it'd take us 2 hours. So we'd go 2 hours on our Miracle Moped to KFC once a month. Anyways, it was the hardest time of my life, but it just created so much resolve in me. And what happened was my Corinne daughter, she was the first face I saw, and she came up to me and she said, I don't have a mom and you don't have a daughter. From this day forth, you're my mom and I'm your daughter. And she's been my daughter ever since. And from that, I just knew I couldn't leave these kids. And they called me, the missionaries I went with, 2 months turned into 6 months. And they said, Lana, can you please be the children's home director? The girl that was going to do it, she doesn't think she could do it. So can you please be the children's home director? So I committed then, okay, I'll be the children's home director for a year. I'll give you a year. Well, that all turned into a year and a half over. The missionary that we went with was going to close the homes for funding purposes, was going to close all the homes. And I said, we can't do that to these kids. will you pray about handing them over to me? And so at 25 and a half years old, I became not just mama to 52 kids, but I became founder of an organization and a ministry as a single young missionary girl with very little ministry and church experience. I would say that those were some of the hardest days of my life, but yet at the same time, just made me with a resolve and a resilience that has kept me here on the mission field for 20 years. It was a really hard time for us here. We just moved to the border because at that time we had heard that 60 women and children daily were being trafficked on our border. Our border, the destination is Bangkok, which is known as the armpit of the world for children involved in prostitution. And so when we had come here, we were doing work around here, but when we come here, we would find out that there was no safe home. There was no Christian safe home. There were no children's homes at that time. Nobody was doing anything about these children that were being trafficked and sold. That we rescued our first 8-year-old girl for $24. And from there, World Vision actually it said, if you start a home, everyone's scared. The border control, the police, the government, they're scared of the border control, they're scared of the police, they're scared of the government. But it's because these children are Burmese that are being trafficked over. They're not Thai children, and we're in Thailand, so they're technically illegal. And so they said, everyone's scared, nobody will do anything. And I said, well, what if I do something? Because I literally heard God say, you do it, you do something. And I said, what if I do something? And they said, if you do something, we'll get you 12 children tomorrow that would have been trafficked. And so I said, do it, get me the children, we're starting a home. So that's how we started. So when we started, boom, it just exploded because there was nowhere to send these trafficked children. So everyone was calling us and sending them to us, the local clinics, the hospital, all of them. They were calling us and sending World Vision themselves. Everybody was calling us and sending children to us. At that time, babies were a hot commodity. Babies were being sold on our border for $18. 500 baht. There was different reasons they were using them. And so basically they were just a hot commodity, and we were rescuing babies left and right. Once you rescue a baby, you have to have the Pampers, you have to have the formula, we have to have a caregiver for these babies because a lot of them are either abandoned at the clinic, and that's how the traffickers get them. And so that's why the clinic was calling us. And they're abandoned because something's wrong with them, or, there's shame or something's happened. And so with all of that, we have so much medical, you need a one-on-one caregiver so that baby can bond. So a rescued baby would cost $300 a month. Well, we were struggling. We were rescuing so fast that we couldn't even feed the kids we had. And I knew that there's no way I could take in babies when I can't even feed the ones I had. That's just irresponsible. It was to the point where I was cringing when the phone would ring because I knew it was a call for a baby. And so the clinic called me and just said, hey, we have this baby. And I said, look, I can't feed the kids I have. Can you please send the baby somewhere else? And I said, I hate to say that. I want this baby, but I can't feed them. And they said, Lana, there's nowhere else. Nobody else will take babies. And I said, well, what happens if I don't take this baby? And they said, you have 72 hours. If you don't get this baby, there's so many people coming in and out. It's a free clinic. If there's so many people coming in and out that there's no way for us to watch and monitor this baby. If you don't get this baby within the next 72 hours, this baby will end up in the hands of a trafficker. And so that pressure, that immense pressure was just weighing on me so strongly. And it was just a hard time. And I just remember looking at my air conditioning unit and saying, I can sell it. And at that time, I think I could get $500 for it. And at that time, it was like 6 months of rice. Well, if you know how hot Thailand is, if you're going to sell your air conditioning unit in tropical heat weather, you are the most desperate in the world, honestly. And so that's the point. I said, okay, I'll sell my aircon unit when we get back, and that's how we'll survive. Well, around the same time, my children's home director now, who has been in my life since she was 10, was graduating from Bible school. And she said, can you please come? You've been a part of my life, and I feel like you need to be here. And plus, she was coming back to help me in Thailand. So I had to make sure that I would get her on a plane, that she wouldn't get snatched away from a young single guy. So I had to put her on a plane because I had some work for her to do over here in Thailand with me. She had to raise my baby. So I spent the last money that I had in my personal bank account to get down to Tulsa, Oklahoma. Wiped my bank account clean, and it was like $1,000 emergency fund. And so spent the last money, got there, ended up staying with some friends and that I hadn't seen in 10 years. And so I'm at the table, I'm stressed, I'm jet lagged, I'm tired, I'm worried. What am I going to do when I get back? How am I going to feed the kids when I get back? Just all these stuff, just carrying the weight of the world on my shoulders, honestly. And we sit down for a beautiful dinner, and her husband is a businessman, and he said, Lana, what's your $1 million God dream? And I remember thinking, you American, my $1 million God dream, you guys think so big. I said, I just need to keep babies from dying. Like, I just need to keep babies out of hands of traffickers. My $1 million God dream, I just need rice to feed my babies. And it was so funny because I thank God I didn't say it. They're some of my best friends and they're my board members. And I tell this story and he laughs so he knows. So I won't get in trouble. But and I remember thinking it, but out of my mouth saying, thank God. I said it from what came out of my heart, not what came out of my head. But what came out of my heart was, I need land to build my vision because my vision is too big to rent. I want to be able to rescue children and not worry about how we're going to feed them and not worry about what we're going to do and be able just to freely rescue children. And I said, I need land and I need building. I want to do family style safe homes. I don't want to put 25 kids in a room. I want to do family style. I want them to see what it's like to have a mother that doesn't sell them and a father that doesn't sneak into their room at night, to see what a loving marriage is and not an abusive situation, to see what a healthy family unit looks like. I said that this is what I want. I want complete and total healing for these kids. And I want family style safe homes on a land, on a piece of land. And I don't want them in a concrete jungle anymore. And my friend looked at me and he said, well, Lana, I know a little bit about land. Let's look at it all. So he starts to pull the dream more and more out of my heart. And we lay out this beautiful piece of property with family style safe homes. And he said, he looked at it and he said, you need about $500,000. And I looked at him and I said, $500,000. And I just remember in my head, I just need $500. I just need $1,000 for rice. Like, I just $500,000. And so I excused myself from the table and I was walking up the stairs and I started grumbling. I said, $500,000. I just need rice for my babies. You American, $500,000. And I just turned around from the stairs and just told my friends, hey, can you just let me sleep in tomorrow? I'm jet lagged. I'm tired. I'm a little stressed about some stuff. Can you just let me sleep in and not wake me up in the morning? And they're like, sure, just go ahead and go to bed. And I'm just mulling and grumbling, $500,000. So I go to bed that night and I just remember looking up and just feeling like at the end and just not knowing what I'm going to do and not knowing what I'm going to do when I get back. And also we wanted to rescue those babies. I didn't know what we were going to do or how we can do that and how feeling like that's not responsible of me. And just the pressure, and trying to figure it all out. And, I just said to God, like, I'm doing everything you asked me to do. You asked me to rescue children. Like, I'm doing everything I know to do. I don't know what else to do. I just said this. I just remember these exact words. Something has got to give. I just remember a tear going down the side of my face. And I'm a tough girl, but it was one of those breaking moments, where it was just like, I came to the end and I didn't know what we were going to do. And so that next morning, I woke up to my friend shaking the bed and she's crying over me and screaming over me, Lana, get up. They're going to build you your homes. They're going to get you your land. Get up. Aaron got you a meeting with his boss. He's the #1 custom home builder in Tulsa, Oklahoma. They've been looking for an orphanage to support. They're going to get you your land. They're going to build your homes. Get up. And as I started to sit up, I literally heard the audible voice of the Lord. And he said, and I did it all while you were sleeping. I didn't need you to figure it out. I didn't need you to worry it out. I didn't need you to stress about it. I don't need you to figure out how you're going to feed my children, how you're going to rescue my children, how you're going to take care of my ministry, how you're going to do my will on the earth. I don't need you to figure it out. He said, all I need you to do is trust and obey. Lana, can you do those two things? Can you trust and can you obey? And I said, yes, sir. And he said, okay, then. And it actually, I say this, and it's the passage in Psalms 127, verses 1-3. And it says, it's vain for you to rise up early, to go to bed late, to eat the bread of anxious toil, for so he gives to his beloved even while they sleep. And so what I tell everybody is he did it all while I was sleeping.
So Nathan and I got married. I was still in college when we got married. And I think that my vision or my dream for our life was, I wanted for us to finish school, and he was going to get a good job, and we were going to buy a house and have some kids and live happily ever after. And that would be our life, and it would be happy and fulfilled and safe and good. And we did. We kind of began that life that I had envisioned. It took us a little while to conceive our first child, and then we were hit by a drunk driver. And so we lost our first pregnancy. And that was a really difficult thing. And I remember kind of crying in the carpet and thinking, why doesn't anybody talk about this? But life kind of went on. We had Haley. We called her the fairy tale baby. She was like this, would sit in this bouncy seat and just she was on a schedule. She was like one of those dream babies. So you just want to do it again right away.
Sure.
And so we did. And I became pregnant I found out when she was 5 months old. We were pregnant with twins, and they were born at 30 weeks, Hayden and Nathaniel. And Hayden, who is 20 years old now, we have the privilege of parenting and loving here on earth, but Nathaniel passed away at birth. And so we had an almost 11-month-old at home. She wasn't even 11 months old yet. And a child in the NICU and a child that we were grieving. I just remember feeling like my heart doesn't know what to feel right now, because I was longing for this. Haley was a baby. She wasn't even a year old. And I longed to be home with her. And I was worried sick for Hayden, who was in the hospital. He was 2 pounds, 10 ounces. I wanted to be with him. It was a lot to deal with, but through all of that, I feel like that was a really pivotal point in my faith. Now, I was a strong believer before this. It's not that I wasn't, but God became so real to me, because when loss and grief comes, he meets you there. That was really a faith-building time for me. It was obviously difficult and not something that anybody wishes for, but the blessing of it was that I feel like it built the foundation of my faith, and I trusted him differently, and I knew that he was faithful, and I knew that he showed up, and I knew that he healed and redeemed, and it was personal. It was an experience that I carried with me, and that just taught me really more about who he was. I've always had a longing for purpose in my life. But when you have lost, I think a child in particular, I think any of us that have loss would say that it does give us a different perspective. Our days here are numbered. It goes fast. And what are you going to do with your days? I want to live in a way that, not that I feel like I'm earning anything, because I'm absolutely not. There's nothing I could do to earn grace and salvation. But I do want to be purposeful with the days that he's given me, so that I get to the end of my life and I look back and I can say that I did my best to use what he gave me well. Emma came along a couple of years later, and I would say, other than, kind of working through that grief and processing what that was, our life went on kind of as planned. We had these 3 little ones. My husband had a steady job. I stayed home with the kids. I would say that I wasn't left the same after that loss with that different perspective. And so I really did begin to wrestle even more so with purpose. So that safe and stable life, I guess, didn't feel like enough anymore. And it created a discontent in me that wasn't about not being happy with what I had, materially speaking. It was about a wrestling of, what else does God want for me and in our lives?
But did you have a sense that he was nudging you towards something?
I did. That was the first time that international adoption began to stir in my heart. I remember one day, at this point, Emma's probably 4. So our kids are probably 4, 6, and 7. And I had sent away for a packet from an international adoption agency. And it came with a DVD in there. It was Stephen Curtis Chapman. And I remember he was, it was on the beach, and he's playing the grand piano when love takes you in, and his, Chinese daughter is running up and down, the beach in the waves. And I just sobbed because it was full of scripture about what God says about caring for the orphan and what his heart is for the vulnerable and how we as believers are to respond. And I was so full of purpose as I watched that. I was sure that he was going to feel exactly the same way. And so when he got home from work that day with no warning, I grabbed him by the hand and put him on the couch and I said, honey, I have to show you something. And I played the DVD, and my husband is an amazing man and he's a strong believer and he cares about people. But you can imagine for him, he's just gotten home from work. He has no idea what's coming. Yes. And I sit him down and put him in front of this DVD. And again, I'm sitting there sobbing and he's looking like, what is happening right now? And it gets done. And I turn to him kind of with this expectant look, when he says to me, honey, I love that you care about people. But we don't have the money to do this. Like, this is not probably for us. And then after a quiet moment, I think he said something profound like, what's for dinner? It was just kind of like conversation over. And I was crushed because I was sure that I had found what it was that God had for us.
So was that end of conversation for that point?
In an uncharacteristic move on my part, I actually kind of shut my mouth about it because I felt I didn't have an answer for some of his concerns. I didn't know how all of that would work out. And so I actually went back to teaching once all of our 3 kids were in elementary school. I went and taught at the Christian school where they go. And we all went to school together for several years. And looking back, it's funny, I can see how God placed me there just for his purposes at that time too. We were surrounded by international adoption. It's funny, God just showed up in all of the most unexpected ways. As I was kind of praying through this, and international adoption is coming back to me at this point, and that kept coming back up. I kind of just told God, like, listen, like, I think it's a great idea, but it doesn't work for us for all of these, different reasons. And if our 2 older girls, they are not alike, didn't have a lot of the same ideas or personality or interests. And in 1 week's time period, one of them came to me and said, Mom, I think we're supposed to take care of kids in Africa. And I was like, well, that is interesting. And then the other one, who was really not our risk taker, came and said, Mom, I think I'm supposed to be a missionary to kids in Africa. And I'm thinking, they hadn't been together. They hadn't talked about it. And then in a funny twist of fate, I suppose God has a sense of humor. I needed a root canal that week. And so I had some time off work. And I remember picking a book up on tape with the idea that I would listen to it during the procedure. Of course, that didn't end up happening, but I did listen to it. And it was a book called Dangerous Surrender by Kay Warren. And the entire book is about living a life of risk and living a life of dangerous surrender, of giving it all to God, of laying it all down, of letting him do what he wants with your life. And the storyline all had to do with orphans in Africa. It wasn't coincident. It was one of those, like, you're just being bombarded. You just know it's not all coincidence. Mm-hmm. And I was so emotional that week. I remember sitting down. I actually wrote my husband a letter, which seems like a crazy thing to do when you live in the same house, but it was kind of a processing thing. I'm a writer. It's kind of a processing thing for me anyway. And I just said, listen, I understand all of the reasons this doesn't work. I understand that we don't know where the money would come from. We don't know what happened with my job. I don't know how it's going to affect the kids that we have now or what we're inviting into our home. But this is what I do know. I know that the number that was thrown around at that time was 147 million orphans. And I also have been reading and been discovering what God's word says our response as believers is supposed to be to them. And I also know that I don't see anywhere in scripture that it calls us to live a safe and guarded life. So I'm just laying this out for you, and I'm just asking you to pray. I don't even want to discuss it right now. I was a mess, actually, at the time, just just so full of emotion about the whole thing. And he read the letter, and he brought it to me, and he just promised to pray. And that was on a Saturday night. And by just a few days later, he came to me, and he said, do you still have that DVD that we watched years before? And I did. I said, yeah. And he said, well, if we're going to do this, don't you think we should probably show the kids? And I couldn't believe it was happening. but I knew that God was working on his heart the way that he was
Wow.
working on mine. We decided to adopt one child, and it felt scary. I mean, we really started with, we weren't afraid about bringing a child into our home. It was more, it just felt so big because it changed so much in our life, and we didn't really know. I mean, the finances really tripped us up. But, I feel like every time you step out to do something bold and big for God and he shows up, it grows your faith and it proves him faithful. And not only do you get to experience that and you get to see it, but the people around you do as well. And that's exactly what happened with our first adoption. He provided every penny through lots of different, donations and fundraisers and savings on our part and tax returns. And he pieced it all together. And so then in August of 2009, we brought Elijah home from Ethiopia. So Nathan and I traveled in August.
And how old was Elijah?
Elijah was 7 months old when he came home.
Baby.
Yeah, he was a baby. Yeah. And the backstory on that a little bit is that I kind of laugh at ourselves now a little bit, but at the time we thought that we were really doing the responsible thing because we thought that that was the safer option, that if we go and bring
a younger child, meaning?
If we go and bring a younger child home, we have we have more of an opportunity to influence their life. And we were really at that point, we were afraid. That's the truth. We were afraid. Yeah. And we thought bringing home an older child might more disrupt our older kids' lives. So here we are still kind of saying, yes, God, we're going to do this, big, bold thing for you. But we kind of want to control it a little bit because we really want to do the safest, I guess the firstborn child in both of us kind of thought that was like the responsible thing to do. And we're glad that we did because it led us to Elijah and he is our son and, we adore him. And during the time that we were in Ethiopia, we spent a week there. And one of the things that they do when you're in Ethiopia is that they take you around to visit different orphanages. So just being in the culture in general and seeing poverty up close and personal and in a way that really neither one of us had experienced. So it was challenging and difficult to see that up front. And then when you take us into the doors of an orphanage, and I looked around at all of these faces and I thought, I know people that could take these babies. I know people that could love them and give them a home and teach them about Jesus. And I wanted to race home and almost shake people do you know there are children across the ocean? They need you. Mm-hmm. They need to know about Jesus. They need to, have their needs met. But when we got back home, we did begin to talk about it. And we both had really felt like when we were in Ethiopia, we just really felt challenged that, we live in a house with bedrooms and, we're not perfect, but we have a family and we can love them. And most importantly, point them to Jesus and we can do more. We can do more. And so we did continue with the process of second adoption. And I remember sitting down with our social worker and she asked us, when you do adoption paperwork, a lot of times they will have you indicate what you're open to. It's not really like a request, I only want a 3-year-old boy with this guy, but it's more like, are you open to this age range, this sex, whatever? And we just said, we don't know because we're not really doing this to fulfill a need in our family. We're doing this to be used for whoever needs us. And I remember it was an afternoon in September, a year after Elijah had been home. So in the next year, and I was standing in the kitchen, he was napping, my big kids were all at school, and the phone rang, and it was our adoption agency. And she said, so how you are kind of open-ended on your request for this adoption? She said, I have something that you might consider praying about. And she said, well, we just got a file for 3 siblings that we're trying, that we'd like to place together. And Meredith, I just remember literally the room started to spin. I was like, okay, so Lord, okay, so can we talk about surrender? And at the same time that I'm feeling kind of overwhelmed and she's telling me about these kids and I'm thinking to myself, we have 4, that means we're going to have 7. I don't know how to parent 7 children. And the Lord said, yes, you do. Not that I did, but that I could do it with his help. And I just remember knowing, even before I called Nathan, I knew exactly what he would say. And so we prayed about it. We both felt clear that we were to move forward. And kind of our agreement at that point was, we're just going to keep doing the next thing. I remember us praying and asking God that if it wasn't the right thing, that he would just close the door, that he would just, stop us short of making a mistake, please. And he did not. And so then in February of 2011, we brought home Grace, Aaliyah, and Solomon. At the time, they were 6, 5, and 20 months. Yeah.
And what was that adjustment like?
It was crying in the carpet hard. It was really hard. Yeah. Not because we didn't love them fiercely. We did and do and always have. But when you invite 3 strangers into your home that have loss and trauma and don't speak your language, and you're playing charades for everything. And then I just remember one day sitting down with a couple of my older kids and just saying, I'm sorry I'm not doing this well. Like, I'm sorry that you need me, but they need me. And I remember at the time, it just felt like there were so many needs and it felt overwhelming. And it just felt like I wasn't doing a good job for any of them. And my oldest daughter said, she goes, Mom, I don't even know what you're talking about. So, there was grace in that, at least, About a year after those kids had been home, Nathan and I both again felt like God was telling us there was one more. And I literally remember sitting on my bed and journaling about this and writing out to God, like, okay, so there are other people. There are
somebody
people
else
that don't
could do
have
this?
7 children, people that haven't done this twice to bring 4 kids home. Like, it was not a sense of like not wanting to follow what God had for our family. It was more of like, I don't know how much more like I can physically do. Like, I don't know if I can do this and do it well, and wrestling with my own inadequacies, really. But I remember hearing God whisper as I was writing all of this out and saying, of course not audibly, but in my heart, I heard him say to me, I'm not talking to you about other people. I'm talking to you about you. Will you go? So we did. Samuel came home the next year. So they had been home a little more than 2 years. But the time that he came home, all of our younger kids are Ethiopian. Okay. So he's also from Ethiopia.
How old was he when
he was not quite 2. Yeah, but we are blessed by him. We joke, we say that he's either going to make us old or keep us young. So we're hoping for the second. He is the life of the party at home. And so, and we're so blessed by him. And what that kind of taught us is that God always knows better, even, when it seems like the craziest of things to us. And it did. And it still does, really. But yeah, of course, he's been home for 5 years now. And, it's hard and it's busy. And I feel like what we've done is that we've created a life that requires dependence on God in every way. God really did do something in our life so big that it had to be because of him. But we are blessed by them and by this journey that he's had for us. And we're glad we didn't miss it.
All of the stories we've shared today are excerpts from interviews on The Unfolding. So if you want to hear more, go back and listen to the full episodes. Thanks to Courtney Smallbone, who shared her story in page 142 of The Unfolding. Lana Vasquez, her story is in pages 93 and 94. And Kathey Garrison, one of our very first episodes, hear her full story in page 5. We are grateful to all of these women who've shared stories today. And if you have poured your love into the heart of a child, we celebrate you too this Mother's Day weekend. This past week marked the 5th anniversary of the Unfolding podcast. We launched it in 2019 and never imagined that 5 years later, we would have the privilege of telling nearly 200 stories. Thanks to your support, The Unfolding has been downloaded over 3 million times. That's pretty amazing to think about. Thanks for subscribing, sharing, rating, reviewing the podcast. It all helps spread the word. Another way you can support The Unfolding is to give a gift of any size to the Wow God Podcast Network. You can learn more about how you can help us create Wow God stories at wowgod.com. Just click the donate button. Thanks to the Unfolding team, Lindsay Caparoon, Michael Shermack, Victoria Smith, and our producer and network director, Jason Rackow. The Unfolding is a Wow God production, a ministry of the University of Northwestern St. Paul. Discover more at wowgod.com. We'll be back next week with another page of The Unfolding.